I'm Alex Gupta with UATV. Today I'm speaking with Senator Andreychuk. She is the co-chair of the NATO Ukraine Interparliamentary Council. Oh, hello, Senator Andreychuk. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you. You're welcome.
During the Cold War, NATO policy, NATO engagement towards the Soviet Union was more regarding total war. And now, since the end of the Cold War, we're facing a different type of threat from Russia, more of a hybrid warfare, cyber warfare. How has NATO's strategy changed since the Cold War?
Well, first I should probably say that in the Cold War, NATO was a defensive alliance. And it was a threat to one is a threat to all. So it was countries coming together to defend themselves. So it was not an offensive alliance. But what you do is you arm yourself, you prepare yourself for the threats that you may think would come. And so that was what the East-West, there was the Warsaw Pact, there was the NATO. Since then, of course, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the question was, what's the worth of NATO? And it took some time for the countries and its citizens to say, we still must defend ourselves. Maybe the threats will be different, and we talked about things like environmental threats. We talked about things like new actors, non-state actors, and of course there's always that there may be a threat from some country. But the conversation always was that Russia being independent and all of the other countries being independent, we start with friendship and common goals. So as things have evolved, there were times and opportunities to work with Russia. Then things seem to take a different turn. And of course, with the actions of President Putin and his government, things have escalated, and the aggressive nature of Russia's involvement, first in Georgia, and other incursions using new technologies into society. So now the hybrid warfare is one of the things, but people will argue that we've had hybrid warfare a long time. You know, that's what Secret Service and police services is all about, embedding your people before some advance, and then justifying it under conventions and treaties, that we have a right to be here. And if you know the day that the aggression came into Crimea, it was, we have a right to be here. No, there are international treaties, sovereignty, territorial integrity. Those are our international norms, and you're violating them. Please move out. You signed the Budapest Pact. You said you guaranteed the territorial, move out. And then, of course, the little green men were already there. They had the port, and it was easier to move. And even then, President Putin himself admitted that they were aggressively involved in Crimea, which is a violation of international norms and becomes a question indirectly, how does that affect our countries?
So since the 90s, it's changed a lot, the NATO policy, how they engage Russia. What would you say the biggest difference between when dealing with the new Russia with Putin versus during the 90s with Yeltsin?
Well, I think we were all optimistic at the start. They stated they wanted to create democratic institutions. They stated that that was their movement. They wanted to live under international norms, and they had a whole reform to do, as Ukraine had a reform agenda. And so I think we took them at face value, as we should, and we saw positive steps being moved that way. But the cracks started appearing, and so I think we were cautiously optimistic and then worried somewhat, and we saw certain maneuvers and certain statements coming out of President Putin's government that were worrisome. But we continue to want to engage to convince them that it's in everyone's best interest to have a cooperative. And so, you know, NATO had a special relationship with Russia, the Council, and they continue. And I, part of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, we have a counterpart. So we continue to engage with the Russians, and often they came to our seminars, and even though they were not members, they put forward resolutions, and we had some healthy debates and differences of opinion. But nonetheless, we were working with them. And then, of course, came the Georgian issue. We immediately said that was a violation of international law. And however, over time, we attempted to re-engage with them, and we meaning the countries and the parliaments of the NATO countries. But then I think it really unraveled, if I can say, any optimism with the invasion of Crimea. It's totally unconscionable, totally a violation of international law, and absolutely no respect for the rights and wishes of the people of Ukraine.
We had a professor on from the Naval War College who had worked in the Baltic states in Russia, and he told me, he said, while NATO was working with the Kremlin during the 90s, they put on the face, as you said, that they were welcoming of it, that they were fine with it, but they were really thinking that this is a total encroachment and we really want nothing to do with the West. We don't like what they're doing. Is that true?
I think there are certain elements of that are true. I think it was a very difficult time for the people under the Soviet regime in the last number of years. So there was optimism that democracy and the changes in Russia would be to their benefit. But one of the things that I found in my many years in working on the international scene, those who have not lived under democracy aspire to the principles, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, a better life, having your say. But it takes a long time. It takes a lot of work. And I think they were not prepared, nor did we understand, I think, fully what they needed to do to reform. And once your life doesn't change for the better, cynicism does crawl in. And I think that was then ripe for someone who would take advantage of the situation. And I can only be that cynical now because I see the actions of the government. But throughout those years, I would, perhaps from a military point of view, but from a political point of view and from a human point of view, we thought that the international order, being part of the United Nations structures, understanding the horrors of any military engagement in this day and age, would not be the way that the Russian government would choose to go. And so I think on the one hand, we saw the worrying signs. On the other hand, we were hoping for the optimistic, is that they wanted to be part of an international community. It's in their best interests. It's not just in ours. And obviously, what is happening now can't be for the best interests of the Russian people.
I wanted to ask you, the breaking news today, the U.S. launched strikes against the Assad regime in Syria, close ally of Russia. How is this going to change the relationship between the U.S., NATO, and Russia, if at all?
Well, we don't know yet, right? That's the thing. This action has just happened. We'll have to see what the response is. And I'm sure that we're the politicians. The NATO headquarters, I'm sure, is analyzing this. We heard statements today that there was some appreciation in the NATO headquarters that they were forewarned, which is, I think, a good sign of the action that was taken, that it wasn't done precipitously. It was done with some thought. And so we'll now have to see what the reaction is. From a political point of view, it's difficult because this has been such a complex, difficult situation, the Middle East and Syria, and it spills over into Iraq, into Turkey, etc. So to comment now would probably be inappropriate. If you know the horrors of chemical actions on human beings, it's the most horrific thing you can think of to do to civilians. So I can understand that wanting to say enough is enough. On the other hand, what does it do to the dynamics of all the players? We can only appeal to them to stop using those methods and to come back to the peace table and find a resolution in everyone's best interest. The road of chemical reactions has to be in some way answered. Was this the right answer? Time will tell.
With regard to the Trump administration, I know, when he was first elected, even before he was elected, there were questions about his commitment to NATO. The New York Times ran an article saying, the weight of the world is really sunken on Trump. Do you agree with that? And has your opinion, if it has it all changed? I don't know what it was, but do you think, he is committed to NATO? Is this justified? Do you really now have a change of heart about the administration?
Well, it's too soon to judge the administration. Let the reporters do it. They can speculate. But as a very close neighbor, we're very close. I come from Canada, and we're very committed not only to NATO, but NORAD. And that's our defense and security. So I want to see how this, may I use the term, plays out. It's early in the administration's time, and we will have to see what the ultimate positions are of the United States. It's precipitous to judge them on that basis at this time.
And my final question, I know that you are one of the, I believe, 13 or 14 people, 13 people in Canada who was banned from entering Russia by Vladimir Putin. Would you be able to explain the circumstances around that and, your thinking about that?
Well, it's a little more complex than that. It's Canada's actions, and those of us who spoke out very strongly for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and I have been very vocal in that area and very much committed to international human rights. So to me it was intolerable what happened in Crimea, and now with the Tatars in Crimea. To me, it's not what a responsible government should do. So I spoke out very, very openly. I made my views known not only in Canada, but through NATO Parliamentary Assembly and every other fora that I work in. And so this was, once the sanctions were being put on by Canada and by the international community, this was the retaliation, I presume. I don't know the motives of it. And so I've been banned from Russia, and that's it. My regret is for my contact with Russian people. I think they need to engage with the rest of the world. So what I see inside of Russia is the most troubling thing. The thwarting of the press, the actions against any opposition to this government is very worrisome. And I worry for the Russian people under these times. And so being banned is not what I would have wanted. But if it makes a statement that Putin's actions are intolerable, then it's a price I pay.
Final question, what are your thoughts on the protests that happened in Russia last week and are continuing?
Well, I think what we're seeing is that there are very few avenues for the Russian community to express any criticism, constructive or otherwise, against the present government. So if you disagree with the government, if you want to express an opinion, if you want to be part of a political process, there are very few avenues. So you resort to the protests. And so this tells me that there is some unrest in Russia. But what is worrisome, again, is the response from the Russian government. Surely, in this day and age, if you want to be part of an international community, you should be supporting people's rights to freedom of speech and access. No government should fear that. Governments should welcome that.
Well, thank you so much, Senator, for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm Alex Gupta with UATV.